In this presentation, we will talk about how to make your church visitor-friendly. It's important when people visit your church to find people who are friendly and helpful and want to serve them. So this presentation, adapted from the North American Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention, will, I hope, motivate you to have a friendly congregation. Now, we need to be reminded that people are really not looking for friendly churches. They're looking for friends. They want to connect with others. Hopefully, this presentation will help your church become a more visitor-friendly congregation. During this presentation, you will learn the difference between a visitor and a guest. You will learn how to get ready for guests on the outside of your church facility. How long does it take a visitor to decide if they're going to return to your church next week? Then you will get ready for guests on the inside of the church. And then we will study the importance of follow-up and follow-through. Our churches must be user-friendly, and we must be user-friendly 100% of the time. Is 99.9% good enough? What is an acceptable level of quality performance? If 99.9% is the goal, then 12 babies will be given to the wrong parents each day in every major city. If 99.9% is the goal, then 200,000 drug prescriptions will be filled incorrectly in the next 12 months. And 107 incorrect medical procedures will be performed at the end of the day today. Since 99.9% is not good enough for patients, pharmacists, and doctors, it's not good enough for the church either. Your church cannot grow without guests, and your church cannot grow if your guests don't come back. So then the question is, what are you doing every Sunday to make sure guests return? One thing we must do is differentiate between a guest and a visitor. A visitor is someone who comes unannounced. A visitor is someone who just shows up. You didn't expect them, you didn't plan for them, and they're not really welcome. Whereas a guest is someone that you expected, you prepared for them, and you really wanted them. And that's what we need in our churches. We need to welcome guests every Sunday, not visitors. Archbishop William Temple has once said, and I quote, "The church is the only cooperative society in the world that exists for the benefit of its non-members." Close quote. So we return to the question, what's the difference between a guest and a visitor? Well, it's the difference between never missing another Sunday or never coming back. We need to get ready for guests on the outside of our churches. Researchers say that church guests decide whether or not to return to the church they are visiting in the first 10 to 12 minutes upon entering the church campus. What's so special about the first 10 to 12 minutes of any guest's visit to your church? Well, it's during that period of time that they see the facilities. They meet the people and evaluate the level of friendliness. They decide whether or not you can meet their needs. And yes, that is a requirement in today's world, whether we like it or not. And they decide whether or not to come back before they have heard the music or the sermon. That may startle you, but research bears this out. To greet your guests properly on the outside of your church, your campus must have directional signage in parking areas and outside of the buildings. There's nothing more frustrating than to arrive at a building and not be able to find the church office or the sanctuary, and signs should clearly point them in that direction. The church needs to be well landscaped, be clean and well maintained, and be inviting cosmetically. The outside of your church says, we're ready for business. We're ready to receive guests. And here's another way that you can prepare and be ready to receive guests in addition to your church campus, you want to be sure that your parking lot, and particularly your guest parking, is clearly marked, easy to identify and to locate. You want to have an adequate number of guest parking spaces. You must have your best parking spaces available for your guests. And you must have greeters. Another ingredient that is essential on the outside of your church is greeters. We've already talked about church greeters in another PowerPoint lecture, but let me just underline the importance of greeters here. Greeters should wear name tags so that persons can identify them by name and also by the fact that they are official representatives of the church. They should be friendly, smile a lot. They should understand the value of this ministry. They should escort guests to the welcome or information center, and they should then introduce the guests by their names. Let's review the importance of having the outside of your church say to your community, "We're ready for you to come." You need to have directional signage in the parking areas and outside the buildings. Be well landscaped, be clean and well maintained, and be inviting cosmetically. In the parking lot, you should be able to identify easily guest parking. There should be an adequate number of parking spaces for guests. Must be your best parking places as well. And you need to have greeters, as we've talked before. Your greeters should wear name tags. They should be friendly. They should understand the value of this ministry, and they certainly should escort guests to the Welcome Center and introduce them by name. I mentioned earlier the value of a smile. Holiday Inn interviewed 5,000 people to fill 500 positions that were needed to open a brand new facility. When the hotel managers interviewed these candidates, they excluded anyone who smiled fewer than 4 times during the course of their interview. This standard was applied to every available job and to every prospective employee. How many of your church members would qualify for a job at Holiday Inn? Now, as our guest makes a transition from the outside to the inside, the parking lot greeters should escort that guest to the Welcome Center, and they need to realize that this time is extremely valuable and should be used to discover the interests and needs of the guest, which the church can meet. And now we're ready to receive people on the inside of our buildings because we're getting ready for company. The first place they will come is to the Welcome Center. At the Welcome Center, the guest will once again be welcomed to the church and receive valuable information, a newsletter, a bulletin, any other information about upcoming events that the church is sponsoring. Once the guest has been brought into the worship center, then it is very important how we acknowledge these guests during that worship time, for this will leave a lasting impression on the person. You will either embarrass them or make them feel welcome. How do you make your guests feel valued? Well, include, do not exclude them. Act like every person is a first-time guest. Everyone who gives an announcement, sings, speaks, must be introduced or introduce themselves so the guest will know who's up front. When you acknowledge your guests, allow them some anonymity. Many do not want to stand and tell their name or where they're from. Most do not want to hold up their hand, so give them some anonymity. Teach your people to value the guest, and then provide a reception or a place that they can meet the pastor following the church service. And if you have staff members, it's important for them to meet the guests as well. Herb Miller, an outstanding church consultant, gives the following statistics for follow-up. 85% of guests return if visited within 36 hours. 60% of guests return if visited in 72 hours, but only 15% of guests return if visited in 7 days. When I moved to Kentucky, I began visiting around churches to find a place that we could serve. It was amazing that out of 5 churches we visited, only one actually made a contact with us. even though we'd filled out a guest card asking for a visit from a church visitor. If the pastor makes the first visit instead of a layperson, the percentages I just mentioned, cited by Herb Miller, will be cut in half. Get ready for company, because guests will inevitably come to your church. Be ready on the outside and be ready on the inside, but please, please follow up, because as in my case, my wife and I jokingly said, if someone ever visits us, we'll probably join that church.